One is naturally led to ask whether there is not something wrong with the system, whether it is not based on a mistaken principle, whether it is not a great mill which, in one way or another, supplies its own grist, a maelstrom which draws from the outside, and then keeps its victims moving in a circle until swallowed in the vortex. That quote might sound like someone describing the current so-called criminal justice system in the United States. But it was actually published around 140 years ago, in a manuscript written by John Peter Altgeld, the former governor of Illinois and namesake of UIUC's Altgeld Hall. Altgeld critiqued the prison system that existed in the 19th century United States. He argued, from data and his own personal experiences as a lawyer, that it was not effective at its own stated aims. Horrible acts of wrongdoing still happened, punishments did not prevent them, and innocent people were often victims of the system. Prisons in the 19th century were in some ways more cruel than they are today. Early U.S. prisons aimed to prevent people from having even the bare minimum of social interaction. For example, at Auburn Prison, established in the first few decades of the 1800s, the people incarcerated there were prohibited from even making eye contact. However, despite reforms being made in the centuries since then, prisons have had a great deal of continuity from then to now. Modern prisons in Illinois have horrible sanitary and health conditions for incarcerated people, and continue the torture of solitary confinement as a punishment. And both 19th century and modern prisons are also justified with the same ideas. First, there is rehabilitation, the idea that going to prison will make someone a better person who will no longer commit these acts of wrongdoing. This idea does not seem to really line up with the reality of prisons. The recidivism rate, or the number of people who go on to commit crimes after being released from prison, is very high in the United States. As Altgeld argued, the system does not seem to rehabilitate people, but suck them into this vortex that they cannot escape. Another justification offered for prisons is that of individual deterrence. Basically, the argument goes that going into prison should deter someone from committing crimes in the future. This punishment will prevent them from wanting to act up again. But once again, we can look at the recidivism rates to see whether people are actually deterred or not. And the reality is that many people go on to commit crimes again after being released. But these philosophies fail on a much more basic level too. They aim to address only the individual, not society. If we want to truly remedy the wrongdoings that occur, we need a different approach, one that understands that crime does not come from nowhere, it comes from social context. Restorative justice does just that, emphasizing the goal of restoring a situation so that similar harm does not happen again. Instead of ignoring root causes and tossing everyone we can in prison, we address the reasons behind wrongdoing. Let's look at an example. In March of 2024, a 17-year-old boy named Tamir Johnson from Champaign, Illinois, was sentenced to 23 years in prison for aggravated battery with a firearm. The person Tamir shot, DeCarlo Douglas, was selling marijuana, and his defense attorneys argue that Tamir intended to rob DeCarlo, but did not anticipate him having a gun. Whether that or another motivation was behind the incident, it is clearly a tragic story. So let's take a second to think about what might have led to this tragedy. Tamir was only 17, not even an adult, when he shot DeCarlo. Clearly, his childhood environment had pushed him in that direction. And he's not alone in this. There's a reason that poor neighborhoods, which are disproportionately black neighborhoods, see more of their residents convicted of crimes. When people are oppressed and run out of ways to make ends meet, they turn to actions that are criminalized. Our current system, based upon the ideas of rehabilitation and individual deterrence, addresses this wrongdoing by putting people like Tamir in prison. But prisons do not solve any of this. Instead, they make the situation worse. They inflict more harm with horrible conditions for people who are incarcerated, and once they're out of prison, they are likely to be swallowed back up by the same vortex that put them there in the first place. A vortex of racism, poverty, and oppression that traps so many people, especially young black men. Now, restorative justice is not perfect, but it has one massive advantage compared to our historical and modern prison system. It is based upon the idea that we cannot sit by and let these cycles repeat. Instead, we must try to address poverty, racism, and oppression, rebuild connections, people, and communities, and prevent this vicious cycle from continuing.